Hi, Stefan the BMW DIY guy. What we're going to be doing today is the unboxing and install of new Generation 2 AvinUSA Android touchscreen into my BMW F32. This is a 10.25-inch screen, really is fantastic. Now my F32 has the Generation 1 in it that I've had no issues whatsoever with it at all, actually, and really enjoyed it and has been a fantastic upgrade. But Avin has the new Generation 2, so I'm going to swap it out for that and show you that process. Now, if you have the OEM screen and you're using this instruction on how to take the OEM out, that's okay, because this will still work. The process is exactly the same. I'm just going to take out some additional cabling when I put the new cabling for the new display back in. So all in all, I'm really excited about this. I wanted to show kind of the progression of the product as they've moved forward. I've worked with Avin now over 5 years, and they're always iterating, always moving forward, and always improving their product. I'm really impressed on what they've done, and I can't wait to have the Gen 2 in my car. So let's get out and get started. So we're out in the car, and the uninstall and reinstall of this is going to be pretty straightforward. And it's going to be similar, at least, to my other install video for this, because again, this is just the Gen 2 of this display. So I'm going to take the Gen 1 out. So we're going to have to take your center console pieces out, the surround out, and your head unit out. And I'm going to treat this like you're doing a new install entirely. So you're taking out your OEM screen. It's going to be a similar process, and I'm also going to replace all of the existing cabling with the cabling from the Gen 2. Now, they're all probably very, very similar, but I want to make sure that I don't mix and match if there is any differences at all. So if you're following this video and you're installing or taking out your OEM screen, the process is going to be very, very similar. We're still going to take your trim off, you'll take your display out, and then you're going to run all your cabling. You're just going to see a little bit of different steps in a few stages along the way. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this center trim out. Now this comes out very simply by grabbing the top and just rocking it gently forward. There's a series of clips that run all the way down the entire trim piece. At the far end, this piece gets very thin, so be very careful when you take it out. You also have your two center switches here. Now you've got a cable right here on top that you can unplug very easily, and then the bottom one is actually kind of hard to get to. So what I usually do is, once I get this out, I unplug the top cable, and then I push this switch from behind, and I push this switch out and forward, and it'll come out of the center of your console, and you can plug and unplug that cable very simply, because the cable comes up really tightly and plugs in the back, and it's kind of hard to get to, ironically enough. So I'm going to pull all of this piece. I'm going to continue to pull this the rest of the way out and pull it very carefully out at the far end. Like I said, the piece gets a little bit fragile. I'm going to pull this out, push the switch out, unplug the cables, and then I'll show you the next steps, which is going to be pulling the surround off and sliding out your head unit. So I know I've got a little bit of light reflection right here in the center. Sorry about that. I've got my work light shining actually through my sunroof, which works pretty well for getting light down in the central section. So the next thing you want to do is, you've got two T20 screws right here that you're going to want to take these out. Now when both of these come out, what you're going to have happen is you're going to have the central trim will come out. Now, I've got an additional cable in the central trim that you may not. Now, if you have the LCI refresh model of the F30 or F32, then you will have the cabling that I have. I have the pre-LCI model, and I did the retrofit of the LCI light surround on this, because it comes with lights, which I thought was kind of cool. So this will all come out. The other thing you need to do is you need to drop this lower piece, and you can just use your fingers, just pry this piece away. It's got the little puddle light right here. You've got two more T20s right here at the bottom, and then this whole section will come out. Now I find that these cables on this are pretty tight. So if you're really careful, you can lay it off to the side without having to unplug everything. And I find that that's easier than necessarily negotiating some of those little cables that are on the back of this. So I'm going to pull these bottom two, and I'll pull this piece out and set it aside and show you what's next. Okay, so the next thing you want to take out is your head unit, and you've got 4 T20 bolts here, or screws here, 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 and here. You also have the 2 screws here and here that will loosen up your display. And again, even if you have the OEM display, that's the same. Now, ironically enough, my center trim here, normally the plug that sits on this side is really super tight, but it came right out. So I pulled it off, and I set my trim aside, so it's out of the way. But so you pull these 4, and then your whole head unit can slide forward. You pull these 2, and your display can come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these, and I'm slide my head unit forward so I can get to all the cabling, and I'm going to pull the display off, and I'm going to unplug it. Now, your OEM display is going to be very similar. There's going to be the cable that comes up to the back and connects to it. You've got these two bolts so you can pull it out, and that'll be really simple. I'm going to have some extra cables, of course, because I've got the Gen 1 Avin display in. So I'm going to take all of this out and then pull all of the cabling that came with Gen 1 to put all the cabling in from Gen 2. Because like I said, I don't believe there's any changes in the cabling, but I want to swap it all out just in case, because last thing I would want to do is introduce some problem because there's been a slight change in the wiring harness or something similar. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all of this, pull these. Now on the back of your head unit, you've got your primary connection that comes up and connects into the back of the head unit. When you slide the head unit forward, you want to unplug that primary connection, again, especially if you've got the OEM display and you're using this video to install the new Gen 2, replacing the OEM. So there's going to be some additional steps that I'm going to simulate as I go through this. So I'm going to pull these bolts, pull these pieces, and I'll show you the next steps. So I have all 6 of the bolts out now. All of the T20 Torx that you've pulled so far, you know, the 4 for the surround, the 4 here, the 2 here, they're all the same. So when you put them back in, it doesn't really matter which way they all go. So don't worry about keeping them separate. Now your head unit will just walk and pull forward, and you can see you've got some cabling in the back, so as you pull this all forward, you have to take it out and get it to set to the side to get to the back. Now I've got a rag down to make sure that I don't bang up my trim, especially it's the new carbon fiber trim from Carbonius. And then I've got my display as well. Now when you pull these 2 screws out, your display will walk itself upward. Now since this is the Gen 1, it's got some additional cabling if you've got the OEM. If you've got the OEM, you probably have only 1 cable on the back. So you just walk it up out of place, and then you can turn it around and get to the cables on the back. So I'm going to pull the head unit out far enough that I can get to the rest of my cabling here, and you can see the wiring harness, this connection wiring harness that I've got that comes along with the Avin display. You've got your primary head unit connection on the back. So again, if you're using this for video for an install of the display replacing the OEM, you're going to want to pull this big primary harness off the back of your head unit and plug in this daughter cable. So I'm going to pull out all of the existing cabling that went with the Gen 1, and then I'll show you walking through the Gen 2 cables installed, and then it'll simulate what it would be like if you're installing OEM. So let me pull all of this out. So treating this as if you were doing a new install, which it kind of is at this point, if you've got all of the existing cabling out, if you're going from a Gen 1 to Gen 2 and you have all the existing cabling out, or you've just pulled the OEM out, you've got your cable here that's from the OEM head unit that goes up to your display, and you've got your primary wiring harness here that's on the back of your head unit. Now on this is where you're gonna connect that daughter cable, and then the daughter cable is gonna plug in here to the head unit. Now the other thing you're gonna want to do, you're gonna notice, is that there's a little green and black cable. They call this the optical cable, and hopefully you can see this as we look at it right here. Now in my case, I had to pull it out of the daughter cable. If you're doing this as a new install, this optical cable is going to be in the wiring harness right here of the original plug. You're going to want to pull this out and transfer it and put it into the same position here on the new wiring harness, right? So it's going to go right here in the new wiring harness, and and it only slots in one way, but it goes in this position right here. So if you're looking at this plug, it goes into the right position or right slot. Just make sure you match it up to the same slot it was in the original plug right here. You're going to need to transfer that because that pass-through doesn't come through the daughter cable, and so you're going to want this into the matching plug on the end of the daughter cable that'll go into the head unit, so you still have that connectivity there. And as I look at this, it's a good idea. So if you're doing a Gen 1 to Gen 2 switch, go ahead and switch out all the cabling. I think it's important to do because the cabling is definitely a little bit different. As you look at it, the way the connections work are a little bit different. So what you're going to do is take your original main bus plug right here, and you're going to plug it into, and there's a little horseshoe locking collar like this that you lock back. You're going to slot it into the daughter cable and then snap that horse collar down. Now this is the cable that's going to plug into the back of your head unit, and you can see all of the various different connections. Now you also have your audio out right here, which is your auxiliary audio out, and this will plug into the back of your head unit. The optical cable will plug in right here, and this will plug in here. So I'm not going to plug it in yet, so I've got some additional cable room to move. Now what you have here at the other end, and this is the plug that you're going to want to feed up, and feed up through your dash, up through the hole right here to get up to the display, right? So now you have some additional connections here depending on what you have. You've got camera lines in, you've got rear camera lines in, those sort of things if you're installing the aftermarket cameras. Now, I've got the OEM camera installed, so I'm not going to be using these connections for the rear camera. I'm going to be using the OEM, so that's not a problem. So I'm going to run all this cabling. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do is, as you look at all the different cabling options that you have with this display, you're going to want to decide what do you want all plugged in, right? So, you know, use the things you think you're going to use. So as I look at this, I've got AV in, you know, right and left audio. That's not, I don't have any video feeds that I'm going to use with this cable, so I'm not going to run it and save the space. This is, again, where you'd run the connection up here and it would come up through the hole and plug into the back of the display. Now, I do have my GPS antenna, which I am going to, of course, I'm going to run the cabling up. Now, what I normally do with the GPS antenna is I normally stick it to the underside of the center console right here. I've talked to people that have had GPS antenna reception problems. I will say that I haven't. So that really hasn't been a problem for me. Now, the other thing I am going to do is I've got the DVR in cabling. I am going to run that because I am going to install the forward-facing DVR camera in a separate video that goes around and mounts here to the rearview mirror. It goes around the surround of the rearview mirror. So I'm going to make sure to have this feed in because it's something I definitely want to show. And then I've got my USB connectivity here as well. These are cables you definitely want, so I'm going to run that. So I'm going to run the DVR in, the auxiliary cables in, up, and then you have this long, narrow cable here as well that's going to plug up. Now, when you plug this in, you want it to come from the void behind the head unit. There's some gaps in between the framing and the vents. You feed it up around through there, you feed it between the vents and up through the hole, up through the center, and get all of these cables pulled and set. And then it's going to be a matter of just taking the display, plugging all the cables in, and then fitting the display into place. So really not that hard. It's just a matter of just kind of getting the cables run and making sure they're nice and neat. So don't forget your green and black optical cable. I'm going to plug that in last, just so I have some extra cable length. I'm going to get all the additional cables I want to run, and then I'll show you how the display installs and all this slides back together. So my cables run. You can see all of my connections are sitting up here at the top now. I've also run my USB cable. There's vents, at least in my F32, there are vents in the top of your glove box, and this plug will fit through through one of those holes just perfectly. So all I did was feed it up through there, because then my two USB connections will be over in my glove box if I ever need to get to them, or run the CarPlay or Apple Auto or whatever I want to run off those connections. So I've run that underneath. My GPS antenna is right here, as I mentioned. What I did is I used a little bit of 3M double-sided adhesive, put it on the back of the antenna and put it right here. Now the cable on your GPS antenna is also extremely long. Now, I've never had any problem with GPS signal with my antenna here. I do know of people that have, and they've run them all the way up to your A-pillar or all the way up in the headliner. And there's a lot of different options, which is why that cable is so long. So if you do have a need to run it, or if you're having GPS reception problems, you can reroute and put your antenna somewhere else. For me, I'm going to put it right here because it works just fine. So now I've got all my cabling run up, including my DVR cable, which is going to be right here. And then all you have to do is take your display and plug everything in. Everything only goes in one place. You also have your microphone connector here as well. So I'm not going to plug the microphone in. You certainly can. There are voice functions and other things that you can use. I'm deciding not to. I'm not going to use it. So I'm just going to route the cabling down to this hole once I fit the display into place. But you plug everything in, it all goes into one place, and you're pretty much good to go at that point. And then you're going to want to connect your daughter harness to the back of your head unit. Again, don't forget the optical cable to connect that to the front part, the part that connects to the head unit. That's where the daughter cable, or where the optical cable is going to go into the daughter cable. So make sure to get that into place. So now I'm going to plug all of my cables in and fit my display in, get the wiring harness on, get the optical cable on, and fit the head unit back into place. But all in all, as you can see, this really isn't that hard. It's just a matter of just getting everything routed around and everything in the right place. As you can see, all the cables are in, and I wanted to emphasize this before I turn the display around to install it. double check all of your plugs are in really firmly, okay? So most commonly, the most common question I get, or if I ever see issues, is the no signal issue, and where you have a display on the Android side, but you don't have a display from your iDrive side. Most commonly, I mean, this is the plug right here. This, in my case, it's purple. It's going into the kind of teal port. This is the feed from your iDrive side, and if this plug is even a little bit loose, you can get interconnectivity problems. You can get it where it'll work sometimes, it won't work others, or it says no signal. Well, because it doesn't get a signal from the iDrive side. So before you spin this around and pull, and reseat all your cables really well, double check all of these connections. Make sure that they're pushed in all the way, they all snap, and they're all in really solidly. And that way you can avoid trouble in the future. Or you get it all put back together and then you turn the car on and you're like, no signal. Why do I have no signal? Well, it's because you've got some cabling that's loose. So just double check that before you flip it around. But as you can see, all the cables are in. They only go to one place. And then I'm going to turn the display very carefully and gently. And I've left the protective plastic on because I want to make sure that I don't scratch up the screen or do anything else like that as I get through this process. So again, I just slowly feed all this cabling down, feed it in. I'm going to pull down on all the cabling, and this display will just walk down into place, and these posts will go right into the original position for either your OEM or your Gen 1. And at that point, it's going to be connecting your head unit, and we're almost done. The additional thing I want to call out, so now that I've got my head unit plugged back in, is off of your add-on wiring harness, that daughter cable is an audio out. So you also have an RCA mini jack audio out cable. Now, in most cases, you will have to run that audio cable. So plug in the RCA jack cable that you have marked audio out, plug it in here, run it underneath your center console and up into underneath your armrest to plug into the auxiliary port right there. Most people need to do that. I will say that there's a small exception of people who do not, and I am one of those lucky people who don't have to do that. I get the auxiliary feed through all of my wiring harness. I don't need to run the auxiliary cable. So I'm not going to show running it. I just wanted to make sure to call it out that if you don't get sound, you plug it all in, this is the reason why. So you don't get sound from the audio side, or from the Android side, excuse me. You don't get audio from the Android side. This is the reason why you'll need to run this cable. Now, you can easily pull up your center console. You can run this cable out through the side of your center console and then down underneath all of the trim on the side here and up and into your armrest area where your auxiliary port is. It's not hard. I'm just not going to demonstrate in this case because I don't need to. All of my cables are all set up. My display's in place. I haven't screwed it in yet, but it's settled down and nicely in place. I'm going to leave the plastic on until I'm all done because I don't want to ding it or scratch it. All of my cabling is nice and neat, and I've tucked all my cabling back. I've plugged into the back of the head unit with the green and black auxiliary cable plugged into the plug that plugs into the back of the head unit. So now it's simply going to be a matter of just picking all this up and sliding it back into place, making sure that you haven't lost any cables along the way. Don't forget you've got your your switch cables that are right up here on top that are going to plug into your center piece. So here's one of them, and see my second one has already gotten tucked back and away a little bit. So yeah, I can find it. So this is a good time to make sure that you have access to all your cables and your cables haven't gone wandering before you tuck all this back in. Cable management is pretty important to make sure it's all nice, neat, and clean. So I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to find my other button wire that goes back here. And then I'm going to slide this back in, and I'll pull all these screws back in, and then you just put your dash back together, and you're done. The head unit's back in. Like I said, you just slide it back into place. It goes over two posts right here. You put in the 4 T20s to hold the head unit in. Make sure that all your cabling is accessible and available. I've made sure to keep my DVR in cable in a very easy to find place right here in the center because I'm going to be installing that camera another time. I want to make sure I can get to it really simply. I didn't tuck the cable down and away. My display is in and secured with the 2 T20s underneath, and it's intact and really solid. Make sure that you get a good seat on those screws here so your screen sits, because again, it's a touch screen. You're going to be touching it. You don't want it wiggly or squeaking or making any noise. So, and then my center dash components are set. So all I need to do now is take my center console, take this, plug it back in, put in the 4 T20s, put this lower plate, which just rocks back up into place back on, and then you push your center console back on. You just rock it back into place really carefully after you plug your switch back in. So all in all, it's really that simple, and really takes only one tool as you go through this with a T20, and maybe a trim tool to get this lower piece off if it's super tight for you. But all in all, it's really not that bad, and as you can see, it's a pretty easy walk forward. So let me get this all finished up, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, as you can see, I've got the center controls back in. I put those 4 Torx in and snapped this lower cover back up into place. You feed your center dash piece back on. You connect that top wire here right at the top, and then you can take your plug, feed it through the hole, and then just walk it up into place, and then walk the switch back on like this. You can see as it's working now. And then all you have to do is just push your switch back in like that, and it's set, and then you walk your center console by just rocking it slowly back into place. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the black clips at the far end of your trim really like to come off. So when you pulled this off, make sure that the little clips that the posts go into, you didn't lose them. They're a bit of a challenge sometimes and can drop and fall and get lost. Don't lose them, or that end piece will be loose. But at this point, you're all back together, so the key is going to be firing the car up and making sure that everything's working. So I fired the car up. I know the view right now of the screen is a little bit further back, and I will do a detailed review of the new Gen 2 plus all of the functions. But one of the most important things to do, there's a sticker on the bag for your Gen 2 display that says you need to go into the CAN bus settings and make sure that it's set properly for your iDrive. So when you look at the car info, if your iDrive is looking kind of strange, it doesn't look right, it's cutting the screen off, there's other issues there, what you need to do is on the Android side, go into Settings, Factory Setup, and the code is 1314, and hit OK. Now, all of that information is on the little sticker. I know it's a little hard to see right now. Actually, it's probably impossible. My apologies. I will show a better view of this. But you need to go into the settings and then go down to car type. The sticker tells you which selection to make, whether you're coming from the 6.5 or 8.8 inch screen for it to format properly. So when I first came up, my original iDrive looked a little strange, didn't look quite right. And I had to change it. So all I did was, again, go into settings, put in the code, and then go into car type and select, for me, option 9. So F30X, 8.8, 10.5 inch screen. You press it twice, it's like a double click. Hit twice, it'll ask you if you want to confirm, you say yes, and then you can see from there that the iDrive side will work properly, and it'll be formatted properly and look right. So all of that will be set up and looking correctly. Now, I do have sound from the Android side without having to run the aux cable. Like I said, I get to be that exception to the rule, which is really kind of nice. As I bring my sound up here. So I didn't have to run the aux cable, which is really nice. Just saves a little bit of time. There you go. So we get a little carpenters to wrap up the video. But as you can see, all in all, this is really not a hard install to do, whether you're doing a swap out from the Gen 1 to the Gen 2, or you're doing OEM to this new Gen 2 display. Now, Avin doesn't sell the Gen 1 anymore. I never had problems with the Gen 1, but the Gen 2, like I said, is supposed to be improved in a lot of different areas. So all in all, really simple install. You can do all your work with one tool and a little bit of time and patience and make a significant upgrade to your car. Like I said, I'll be planning on doing a full review video of the Gen 2 so you can see up closely. I know some of those initial screens might have looked not all that great because of the way my camera is set up, but I will show that. This is just intended for you to see either the swap out or the install. So as you can tell, it wasn't all that hard. Hey, as you can see, the installation of the screen really isn't that hard, whether you're doing the swap out or doing an exchange with your OEM screen. Now, the couple of things to call out here, again, it's super important to have the car type set to the correct setting for your iDrive. So whether you're coming from the 6.5 inch screen or the 8.8, make sure to pick the right option. Like I mentioned, there's a little sticker on the bag for the new Gen 2 display that tells you which one to pick, that the access code is 1314 for the password to get into the car settings to make sure to set it up right. The settings in there also as well. For example, if you're having trouble with your iDrive controller, there's 2 different settings for your iDrive for 2 different types, and try the other one and I bet it'll work properly. So as you go through all those things, make sure that it's set up properly so you don't have any issues. Like I also mentioned earlier, make sure all your cables are in and in tightly. I see from time to time, I see the people asking about the no signal issue, and I've not seen a case yet that it wasn't where the cable was just a little bit loose. Even if you don't think it's loose, and if you have any issues like that, check it, because I'm willing to bet that's probably what it is. So all in all, you can see this install is really, really simple. I'm really impressed, and this has been such a fantastic upgrade into my car that there's no way I could go back to just the OEM screen. And when I ride around in friends or other F-Series cars with the OEM screens, I kind of feel sorry for them. So it's a worthy upgrade for you and your car. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. I try to answer any questions that you may have. Please click subscribe if you liked what you've seen. It really makes a difference for me and my channel. I really appreciate your support, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.